Annyeonghaseyo. This is my emergency Korean. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for staying on. If your stomach is rumbling, please try to ignore it for the next 45 minutes. I would like to invite you to take your seats for this final session before lunch. I'm your moderator, Henry Bonsu, from the UK and Ghana, and this is the launch of the State of the World's Forests, SOFO. It's a publication which some of you will have heard about, but not really encountered so far this year. And we've heard from the many speakers in the high-level dialogue, the trees, the forests, sustainable forestry can help the world recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and combat looming environmental crises such as climate change and biodiversity loss. We're going to look at that in this session because a lot is required of our societies. You've heard people talk about the issues in the previous session, but we need to focus now on just how our forests are doing. People often assume somehow they're going to survive because they were here before human beings and maybe they will be here after we've gone. But that is not guaranteed. So, that is why it's so important to discuss the state of the world's forests, this publication from FAO, which presents data and analysis on the interaction between forests and people, and it's every 2 years. Now, this version of SOFO, State of the World's Forests, is called Forest Pathways for Green Recovery and Building Inclusive, Resilient and Sustainable Economies. And what it does is it presents trends on forests, the provision of benefits to societies, including the impact of the ongoing pandemic COVID-19. And as you heard earlier from the FAO Director General, it proposes 3 forest-based pathways that, if pursued simultaneously, could help address the crises facing the planet, while also generating sustainable economic benefits in the context of green recovery. So, it is my pleasure to moderate this session, where we'll have a detailed presentation, slightly shorter than we had imagined, of the report, followed by a discussion with the lead authors, I think all 8 of them. So please give them a round of applause. These are the people who've been working very, very hard. I want to hear you, please, come on. Show your appreciation for the people who've been working very, very hard to put this together. Now, to set the scene, we would like to share a short video with you. It's my pleasure to introduce Ewald Rammelsteiner, who is the Deputy Director of FAO's Forestry Policy and Resources Division, who's been coordinating the State of the World's Forests 2022 and will present us the main findings. Please run the video.
Forests stand as a vital defense against climate change and biodiversity loss, while also providing livelihoods for millions of people around the world. But they are under threat. In the last 30 years, they've lost an area larger than Algeria and Libya combined. FAO's latest State of the World's Forest report identifies 3 pathways that conserve forests while supporting recovery: halting deforestation, restoring degraded forests, and sustainably using forests to build resilient local economies. In Kenya's Kirisia Forest, the local community has a new mission of preservation, having recently taken custody of the forest after decades of government control. They now go on patrol to look out for wildfires or any illegal harvesting or cattle grazing. Since 2016, more than 100 square kilometers of forest have rebounded from deforestation and degradation.
And there's massive restoration and regeneration happening. And the process of restoring that forest through engaging of community scouts on protecting of natural regeneration.
Pamela Linolganja and her fellow Samburu women nurture a nursery of seedlings for future forest planting.
Hakuna kazi nyingine na hizo mifugo zetu basi tu. Lakini kwa sasa tunaona tu tunaelekea mbele kwa sababu tukifanya hata hiyo biashara yetu kidogo kidogo na bado tunafanya tu hii bado ya nasari, tunaendelea tu kwenda mbele.
Across Kenya, forest-based value chains are emerging and contribute to restoration efforts. Ruth Wairimu gathers firewood from dead branches on 2.5 hectares of her farmland that she's set aside for a tree plantation. She will begin selling timber in a few years once the trees have grown larger. Their timber helps generate jobs across the community, from sawmill operators who process the wood to carpenters next door who craft tables, chairs, beds, and more. In Finland, wood construction chains are thriving based on sustainable forest management. Innovative building materials from wood are helping to respond to climate change and the need to build more circular economies. These prefabricated wood panels are called cross-laminated timber, or CLT. They're as durable as concrete, but faster and simpler to install, store carbon for their lifetime, and require no fossil-based materials, making them more climate-friendly. CLT made here forms the building blocks for schools, apartments, opera houses, and even skyscrapers across the world. Tangible benefits, whether environmental or economic, offer a strong incentive for societies to protect, restore, and responsibly use their forest resources, preserving the value of forests for generations to come.
Metsien kestävällä hoidolla me pystytään varmistamaan metsien hyvä kunto sitten myös tulevaisuudessa.
If we continue to destroy the planet as we currently do, and if we don't find better ways for people to buy food, to get out and onwards from poverty, we will live in a very different world, and it will not be a nice one. The 2022 edition of FAO's State of the World's Forests report looks into a new narrative, how forests and trees can help us with solutions to get out of some of the environmental and economic crises that we currently face. Forests and trees are vital for us on the planet. They provide air, water, food, energy, and renewable materials. For us, it is really important to maintain them, but de facto, they are still shrinking. The issue basically is simple. Those that are here to maintain or even grow them, they do not get enough benefits from doing so, so they continue to shrink. Now here's the thing. If we use forests and trees more wisely, we can both address environmental crisis and economic recovery needs at the same time. Forests and trees can be powerful solutions. Storing carbon and removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Here, forests and trees can provide some 14% of the additional removals of these greenhouse gases that we need to stay within 1.5 degrees by 2030. That's a major contribution. Maintaining and in some areas even increasing biodiversity by restoring forests and landscapes and using trees and forests better for renewable materials that are carbon neutral and with which we can build a more sustainable world. These are three pathways around which we have to look into the future. Protecting forests, stop deforestation is the most important single contributions that we can make. Restoring, putting trees back into landscapes is a major way of improving our terrestrial ecosystems and productivity for our economies. And the third one is using forests and trees, using environmentally friendly, renewable materials that are carbon neutral to build a better future. In any given local context, one or more of these can and need to be applied in a balanced way according to the situation that is needed. The 3 forest pathways, they connect better environment and better production. The 2022 report of FAO, State of the World's Forest Report, has reviewed data and evidence to find out how much do we actually know about the benefits of those pathways and the costs. How much do we know about what needs to be done to make them a reality? How much do we know about how much upscaling potential they have? You will not necessarily be surprised that we have found many data gaps, many areas where we think we need more discussions, more reflections, more research. But then there are also really important points that we think we have to take note. For instance, that in total, if you add up those contributions of these different pathways to climate change mitigation, we're around in the magnitude of 20%. 20% is a lot to contribute to the reduction of climate change. It is also clear that millions of jobs can be created if we restore landscapes, if we put trees back into farms, into areas where people can make a living, to improve the productivity and environmental resilience at the same time. Or that the costs of pandemics, of fires, of pests and diseases are magnitudes higher than if we would be able to prevent them by better taking care of the environment and better taking care of forests and trees. The State of the World's Forests report also looks at ways to finance those pathways. Many options actually exist, but remember, the main point of why forests are shrinking is that those that actually maintain or grow them do not get enough benefits. A farmer who is concerned about food security or about the education of their children, they will make a decision on the basis of costs, of risks, of benefits. The benefits today are often not enough. Investment in forest pathways would have to increase by 4 by 2050. But this seems feasible given that the climate and the sustainability finance sectors are very dynamic nowadays. I'd like to point to 2 areas that I think need particular attention. One is agricultural subsidies. They are already established mechanisms that reach farmers, and the amounts of funding is huge, $540 billion per year. If some of this can be reoriented from environmentally harmful to environmentally friendly, productivity-enhancing investments, that will give a major boost to restoration and more sustainable management of forests and agriculture, including agroforestry. This is one part. The other one is the absence of good mechanisms to reach small-scale producers. Only 1.7% of all the climate finance currently reaches small producers. We do need mechanisms to bring those billions to the small producers to change their way of how they produce today. Let me come to my last point. I have made this before because it's so important. Smallholders, local communities, indigenous peoples, they are at the center and need to be at the center of that development. Altogether, they manage around 4.3 billion hectares of land. If they can own and lead the development, and if we can support that, then we are on a winning path with forest solutions. FAO's State of the World's Forest report proposes these 3 pathways because we think it is the right time to discuss about solutions with forests and trees. These solutions can be applied at scale, they are cost-effective and equitable, and they can be applied fairly rapidly. These are all things that we do need for solutions to work. In addition, they can be applied in areas that other economic recovery programs often have difficulties to reach, the poor in rural areas. But for this to happen, we need policymakers to integrate environmental dimensions and economic dimensions better in their recovery programs. And we need them to empower local stakeholders, local actors more and stronger to innovate better. For finance and investment decision makers to better integrate the economic recovery and climate finance into forest-based solutions and to incentivize private sector actors to invest in this too. For producers and local communities to own and lead their own sustainable development. And for us all as consumers to make the right choices. Forests and trees can be powerful solutions for a better environment, for a better economy, and for a better life for us all.
Thank you very much indeed, Ewald. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Ewald. I was really focusing on that. It seems to be about local people leading the way, but they have to be catalyzed. They have to be enabled. So Ewald couldn't be here with us today, which is why we pre-recorded his presentation, but I understand he's connected remotely in case we need him again. And now to dive a little bit deeper into the main findings of the report between now and 1:30, I would like to introduce the lead authors. And as I mention your name, please raise your left or right hand so everybody knows who you are. We have Tina Verheenen, and she is Deputy Director of FAO's Forestry Division. We have Thais Linares Juvenal, who's a Senior Forestry Officer, Sustainable Forestry, Value Chain Innovation Investment. Margot Busco-Briggs, Senior Forestry Officer. We have Thomas Hofer, Senior Forestry Officer, Biodiversity Restoration. Christophe Bessachier, Senior Forestry Officer, Forest Landscape Restoration. Sven Walter, Senior Forestry Officer, Sustainable Forest Products, including forest-based bioeconomy. Sounds very interesting. We have Marco Boscolo. I think Marco's joining us remotely. He's a forestry officer again, Sustainable Forestry, Value Chains Innovation. And Gerardo Seguro Van Holtz, Senior Forestry Officer, Community-Based Forestry. So Thais, I'm going to start off with you. You worked with colleagues on the chapter providing an overview of forest biophysical and socio-economic resources. It's very interesting technical description there, and their potential to support the forest pathways. Let's get basic here. What do forests and trees mean to global livelihoods and well-being?
Thank you, Henry. Well, one of the great things we could do in SOFO 2022 is to bring new evidence about trees and people, forest trees and peoples. One of the things we found out, we did a new estimation for forest proximate peoples, and we found out that more than 3 billion people live within 1 kilometer from a forest, and more than 4 billion people live within 5 kilometers of a forest in rural areas. So what we're saying here is that between 80 to 95% of rural population are very close to a forest or within a forest, and therefore relies on forest ecosystem services. The other very important point we brought up with this SOFO is in detail, what is the range of forest ecosystem services and how they are valued by communities, by the population around forests. So we did these across ecosystems, across biomes, and you can have the different forest ecosystem services for each type of forest. And it's very interesting because there are estimations that show us that the wealth of only certain, if you take only 3 forest ecosystem services, I'm speaking here about water regulation, non-timber forest products, and hunting, we get to 7.5 trillion wealth from forests, only counting these 3 ecosystem services. We're not speaking here about timber, we're not speaking here about carbon, we're not speaking here about a range, a wide range of other ecosystem services that also contributes to our economies, that also contribute to our livelihoods. When we go to the direct contribution to economies, we also learned that we run estimations for the whole contribution from the forest sector to the GDP, to global GDP, and we found out that forests contributes to more than 1.5 trillion US dollars to global GDP if we count transactions in the forest sector and transactions generated in the forest sector through other economic sectors.
Thais, it's wonderful to hear just how much real value is gained from the forest, and that most of us are within 5 kilometers of a forest. I had no idea. I saw myself as an urban guy. Now, this is amazing. However, the world has lost a third of forest cover already. Despite all of these congresses, deforestation is continuing. We've got the fires in California all the way through to Australia, other disturbances. Is it, and be honest with me, still possible to save our forests and indeed save ourselves?
Well, of course it is. And we are here for that. Of course, urgent action is needed, as we heard a lot about it today. But I think there are some important things that we need to focus on. Deforestation, the deforestation growth rate is decreasing, meaning that we're making efforts in fighting deforestation. However, we still lose more than 10 million hectares per year. So, huge effort is still needed to save our forests. The good news is that we have evidence now that proves that improved forest management and reforestation can, for instance, increase and has already increased the absorption, the carbon absorption by forests. So actually we have now a positive balance. Forest absorbs carbon more than it emits. So this is a great proof that we can save our forests, we can save ourselves, we can make forests continue to make contributions to the planet, including to climate change, and this can be rapidly increased if we take action now.
Excellent, Thais, thank you very much. I'm feeling positive already. Let's see if Margot can make me feel even more positive, because it's one thing for deforestation to be slowing down, but what about halting it and maybe turning things around, Margot? So what needs to be done to actually turn the tide on deforestation to benefit climate, people, and of course, Mother Nature?
Absolutely. This is a top question, I think, of today, and I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm so happy that I've heard so many great commitments from our leaders this morning at the opening ceremony and the high-level dialogue. All of you who are here, I mean, it was really, really heartbreaking to hear the commitment actually to halting and turning the tide on deforestation. So I'll take it as a first starting point. Secondly, building up on what already Thais had said, indeed halting deforestation would not only avoid emitting quite significant amount of emissions, of the GHG emissions, but would also generate significant benefits. The report, the SOFO...
Can you put your mic a bit closer to you, I think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
So in the report, the SOFO 2022 draws on the substantive scientific evidence accumulated over the years, on the trends on deforestation and also on the benefits of halting deforestation for climate, for biodiversity, for human health, for development goals, and also what we need to do about it and how much it would cost. According to recent estimates, halting deforestation could cost-effectively avoid emitting 3.6 to plus minus 2 gigaton CO2 equivalent per year between 2020 and 2050. But we will not deliver that unless we do bold action. So now you asked, Henry, what is it that we need to do? And I think first, on one hand, we need to address the drivers of deforestation. We need to really understand them and address them very systematically. And then at the same time, we need to really implement coherent policies and actions, including conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. And those are the 3 pathways that this report actually draws upon. The report stresses some broad approaches, and if you allow me, I'll just mention 3 of them very briefly.
Yes.
Absolutely briefly, just keywords. First, enable effective management of forest and governance, forest governance, and supporting some things such as clear tenure rights, and I think a lot of people already today talked about it. Secondly, creating incentives for forest conservation, including some positive incentives such as payments for ecosystem services, or removing disincentives, and also Ewald mentioned this already in his speech, including repurposing agriculture subsidies, and then obviously looking into the addressing potential conflict over land between forest and other development needs, and that includes food security and poverty.
A very, very brief follow-up. The UN held a huge food system summit last year. We need to transform the way in which we get from farm to fork. A brief supplementary thought on how we change the way we pursue agriculture. I mean, how vital is that?
This is absolutely crucial question, I think, and there is again no doubt that anybody in this room would really question that. But these interlinkages between forestry and agriculture are really complex, and they are actually multiple. Again, I'll just repeat it once more. Almost 90% of deforestation observed over the last 2 decades resulted from conversion of forests to cropland or to grasslands. And then if nothing is done, this trend can remain driven by the forecasted increase in population and demand for food. Basically, reaching the population to 9.5 billion by 2050. We need to produce up to 56% food more. So, but at the same time, agriculture itself suffers negative impacts from forest loss through feedback loops, such as, impact of climate, water cycle, pollinators diversity, soils erosion and fertility, and so on and so forth. Now, the report, so for 2022, proposes some specific options and some solutions, and we need to look for win-win solutions. We need to work for forest conservation, but at the same time, we need to look into policy coherence. We need to look at the trade and agriculture commodities, and also the business must need to engage very strongly in sustainability goals. We need to look into market shares and the companies and their commitments to deforestation-free commitments. And there's a lot in the report about it that you can read. And then on top of this, full inclusion of local communities, indigenous peoples, youth and women.
Thank you very much, Margot. Let's pursue that thought with Thomas then, on my left. What kind of investments are needed then to strengthen ecosystem health considerations, including forestry and biodiversity, in the One Health approach? Because this is crucial to benefiting climate, biodiversity, health and long-term food security.
Thank you, Henry. Let me first clarify the One Health approach, because probably most people in the audience would think health has to do with animals and people. But here we have to expand the concept. So if I quote the One Health high-level panel, expert panel, it defines One Health as an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. It recognizes that the health of humans, domestic and wild animals, plants, and the ecosystems are closely linked and interdependent. And in practice, however, this ecosystem health, including forest and wildlife, which is the third pillar of the One Health approach, has often been neglected. So this means that ecosystem health dimension of the One Health approach needs to be strengthened to effectively address some of the underlying drivers of disease emergence, such as deforestation and forest fragmentation. Now, specifically to your question about investments, Henry, I think there are 3 main streams, financial streams. The first, it's investments in capacity development to strengthen the forest ecosystem health considerations in the One Health approach. This can be done by building the capacities of forestry, wildlife, natural resources management, government sectors to allow them to properly engage in the One Health dialogue and implementation. The second stream would be investment in the One Health country program assessment to understand what coordination mechanisms are in place and how One Health is implemented. This is crucial in order to ensure that forestry and wildlife sectors are adequately represented and engaged in One Health programming. And finally, the third one is investment in cross-sectoral data collection, databases, and coordination mechanisms to feed information and early warning systems that support the prevention and preparedness in the One Health approach. Hereby, the forestry and wildlife sectors need to consult with animal and human health sectors to identify priority data to be collected and shared. So, Henry, I think we need to really enlarge our knowledge and understanding of what is the One Health approach, and I hope these few messages will help in doing this. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. And ministries need to talk to each other, and they need to be properly aligned. Let's move to Christoph, because you, with your colleagues, have looked into potential of restoring degraded lands and expanding agroforestry. Let's remember we've got the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, 2021 to 2030. So can restoration provide a cost-efficient path to pandemic recovery and a greener future? I'm sure you're going to say yes. The question is, how?
Thank you. Oh yes, briefly, first, you're right, the answer is yes. Ecosystem restoration is a clear pathway to the green recovery, because when you are restoring a specific landscape, you are providing multiple benefits. You are generating benefits for biodiversity, benefits for climate change and climate change mitigation, but you are as well generating income. When restoration activities are based on the development of sustainable value chains, you are creating jobs. And as example, in the Great Green Wall region for the Sahara and the Sahel initiative, 4 million hectares of restoration generated 350,000 jobs. So it's very important in the context of the pandemic to implement activities that are generating jobs. In the SOFO 2022, there is several studies and data given on the cost and the benefits of ecosystem restoration. And most of the recent studies are clearly demonstrated that the benefits are higher than the cost, and that when you are restoring, you are gaining, and you have a clear return on your investment.
You gave a great example of Sahel, and when people think of the Sahel, they just think of just millions and millions of hectares of just pure desert that's been like that for years, and it's gone. But you're talking about maybe changing things, which would amaze people who don't know this area. So what is needed for agroforestry to be successfully scaled up?
Okay, for this question, I will give the floor to the co-author of this chapter on ecosystem restoration and agroforestry. So, Hélène, you have the floor.
Hello.
Thank you, Christoph. And Henry, apologies for being a last-minute addition to the panel.
Yes, I mean, I did notice, but I said nothing.
So for everyone's benefit, my name is Ghislaine Springay, and I'm the Forestry Officer for Agroforestry at FAO. And to answer the question, while agroforestry can be a more sustainable and potentially more productive and profitable solution than agriculture, agroforestry still has a number of trade-offs, and the high establishment costs and the longer-term on investment can be a deterrent to many smallholders. So for agroforestry, it needs to be promoted not only for subsistence, but as a profitable livelihood and land management option. So to answer the question of how do we scale up, we ultimately need more incentives and strategic investment in agroforestry. What does that mean? That means access to high quality planting materials, secure tenure and rights to manage and use land and natural resources. We also need access to subsidies and payments for ecosystem services. There needs to be investment in establishing markets and value chains for agroforestry products. In fact, that was one of the issues we found when writing SOFO, is that we don't actually have a lot of business cases on how agroforestry can actually be profitable. We also need improved extension services that includes technical training in both crop and tree management. And lastly, we need an enabling environment, which is something most of the colleagues have already stated, where agroforestry policies and strategies are encouraged and that we have multi-sectoral coordination, because ultimately, this is not just a forestry sector issue, this is an agricultural sector issue as well.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's talk about forests and green recovery, because SOFO states this and lots of other agencies do as well. It can help countries, forests can, to move toward carbon neutral economies. Let's move to Sven, because Sven, you and your colleagues, you worked on the pathway of sustainable use and building green value chains. So what we need from you is some examples of how forest products can contribute to a growing bioeconomy. So what's needed to fully harness the potential, because things can remain as potential and never be realized. So tell us more about that. What is needed, and how do we halt deforestation and forest degradation, and instead of that, foster ecosystem restoration? What will it take?
Yes. Thanks, Henry. And when we worked on the SOFO, actually it was a very encouraging work for us, because we found a lot of good examples, a lot of activities going on in the forest sector that showcase how forest and forest products can help us to move to an economy that is based on renewable, reusable and recyclable materials. But please, we have to keep in mind that currently 75% of all the consumption of natural resources is coming from non-renewable materials. So we need to break our dependence from these non-renewable materials, and there is where forest products can pass us the way. And the good news here is that demand in forest products is increasing. We have an expected increase in biomass to double by 2060, and that includes forest products like construction, which is expected to triple, and packaging also expected to double. So looking into the construction sector today, it contributes to 40% of the energy and process-related greenhouse gas emissions. And wood products, such as mass timber, they can substitute for steel and cement. And these are products which contribute to 10% of the global emissions. So here we see commitments all over the world to increase the use of wood as construction material. But we do have a lot of traditional forest products which are used and which are increasingly used. Furniture, pulp and paper, bamboo, wild food, medicinal plants. Today, we see that the trade value of medicinal and aromatic plants is increasing by more than 75% over the last decades, and that has been amplified by COVID. You raised the issue what needs to be done. And it's, of course, a complex issue, because we need to go ahead at different fronts. One is that we need viable strategies to increase the sustainable use, but also the availability of forest products. We cannot meet our climate or SDGs target without forest and forest products. We need to keep this in mind. We need to upscale innovation. We need to emphasize circularity and efficiency gains to further reduce the carbon footprint. We heard the youth this morning. We need to develop the necessary skills also to do so in the future. We need to have better data to know what the supply and demand dynamics are in the future. And for this, then, we need innovative financing options, we talk about it later, that bring together finance for climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem restoration, and land degradation. And finally, thinking about the public sector, the enabling environment, which is important, which must be conducive through an adequate mix of regulations and mechanisms, for example, certification, to incentivize the sustainable production and consumption of forest products.
Thank you very much for that, Sven. Incentivize, there's a word that I'm going to hold on to and maybe develop. Think about this. If you incentivize, then people are more likely to invest in it. So let's go to Marco Boscolo, who is going to join us remotely. Because Marco, let's see if we can see you. Where's Marco? Hopefully it's going to appear. The State of the World's Forests makes a case that investment in forest-based pathways need to increase substantially. I think we've all agreed this. The question is, based on the evidence you've been able to collect, what are some of the high potential ways to scale up investments? What works? Let's see if we can, where's Marco?
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes, fantastic.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Henry. Greetings to everybody from Rome. Indeed, the evidence that we reviewed for SOFO indicates that there are a number of ways for scaling up implementation of these pathways. I will just mention three. First one, to look at greening public domestic finance. There are large amounts of domestic public finance that influence forests in both positive and negative ways. Evald has already mentioned earlier that it is crucial to reorient those financial flows, like some agricultural subsidies that generate harmful impacts. They contribute indeed to climate change, to biodiversity loss, and diminish our natural capital. There are also significant amount of domestic public finance that are directed to forests and influence them in positive ways. And it is possible to increase these amounts, for example, by including forests, investment in forests, in restoration, in afforestation, reforestation, by including them in recovery programs. Some countries are already doing this, and many more countries could do this. It is also important to increase the effectiveness with which these funds are used through a variety of fiscal and non-fiscal instruments, and SOFO provides a series of examples of that. A second option is to make climate finance work better for forest-based solutions. Climate finance is expected to play a growing role as evidence is mounting. We're going towards a climate crisis. And in the last few years, the amount of climate finance that has been directed to forests has been quite low, less than 4% over the last few years. And this is, as I said, quite low compared to the potential contribution that forests can make in addressing the climate change. So what can be done about this? Well, policymakers should consider including or expanding the inclusion of forest-based solutions, for example, in compliance markets. And the forest sector could also strengthen their capacity to deliver high quality and high integrity carbon credits. The other option I want to mention is that funding for these pathways is indeed available, but often is sitting on the fence. And the availability of finance needs to be met with opportunities to invest. How can we generate and scale up these opportunities? SOFO recommends the setting up of investment facilities or hubs that can provide public goods, public value, for example, information on forest products markets, capacity building, networking opportunities, business development support, dialogues on how to create and distribute values. And these facilities can also help small and medium-sized enterprises, communities, smallholders to better understand and access markets, integrate into value chains, and it also can help promote policies that do not discriminate.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for that, Marco. And we're going to segue from your final point to Gerardo, because SOFO makes the case that increasing capacity and co-producing knowledge with smallholders and local communities, and we've heard them being mentioned with reverence today, and quite rightly, it can really help scale up the 3 forest pathways. So tell us more how governments, research institutions and other stakeholders can help to strengthen the capacities of local communities, indigenous peoples and smallholders, because as we've heard, they are key. They have the knowledge.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah, last but not least, right?
Well,
forest communities, indigenous peoples, pastoralist communities in many parts of the world, they own 1.4 billion hectares of forest, either own or are present. Communities have used forests for millennia, 5,000 years. The forests that we know today have been under management or use for all these years and have been transformed. So the forests we know have been influenced by humans for many years. But now, communities, many of these communities overlap with the worst case of extreme poverty in the world. you see a close correlation between well-conserved forest areas and indigenous and local communities. These communities are being threatened by the worst pressures over land ever seen in our world, and of course this will continue. Deforestation, degradation, and pressures for many sectors to encroach and use these areas and relegate communities even more are worse than before. One of the most important things that governments and partners and other institutions can do is recognize and protect the rights of local communities to own the forest, to access the forest, to use it and to manage it. Only 15% of these areas are formally recognized, approximately. Ownership rights are not only probably the most important thing, but it's not the only thing we need to do. We need to look at how these communities organize themselves, the governance of areas that are owned collectively is very important, and we need to support local institutions, local community ways of seeing, organizing, and managing the forest. And for helping communities improve the value and generate income from the forest, we also need to provide technical support.
But very quick supplementary. All around the world, indigenous communities are threatened, as we've said, marginalized, and often the government in power, the ministers, the president, they have a real disregard for these people. They see them as not advanced. I remember one minister talking about Stone Age people. I won't mention the country or the minister, but it shocked me. How do you change those attitudes to really value who these people are and how we can work together with them and use their knowledge?
Well, many countries, the governments of many countries still own or manage forest lands, regardless of who is inside. So I think the first thing is to recognize that communities are there, they probably will be there, and they have been there and managed the forest sustainably for many years. So first, recognize that the communities are partners or should be treated as partners with society, with governments, to improve the way these areas are protected and conserved. Of course, we need to offer economic alternatives, and forest community organizations, small organizations, productive organizations can be very effective and efficient in engaging in different markets for different kinds of products. But they need also our help. They need our help in connecting in these value chains, supporting their skills to better access markets and work, in this, outside world that they don't know very well, but that we can support.
Fantastic. Gerardo, thank you very much indeed. Time is against us, so I'm going to hand over. I'm sorry, but there's no time for questions and answers. Normally we would provide the time, but we did start late. So I'm going to ask Tina Vahainen, Deputy Director, to give some closing thoughts and send us on our way with energy and with hope and with determination for the rest of this Congress and beyond.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, the State of the World's Forests 2022 has been now launched. And I think you have heard a lot of news, innovation, new practices, new proposals on the way forward. And I would like to thank already my colleagues who have done a tremendous job in actually putting this SOFO together. I'd like to propose just a few take-home messages. First, it is very clear that there is no healthy economy without a healthy planet. The environmental deterioration continues. We've heard the figures many times today. 10 million hectares of forests are still lost every year to other land uses, and that of course also reduces the biodiversity in forests. And we are seeing, not only seeing, we are living actually through some emerging diseases. But forests and trees can play a good and positive role actually to help us to come out of these crises, and at the same time to move towards sustainable economies. And the solution indeed lies, and you already have heard this many times, in these three solution pathways: halting deforestation, restoring forests, and using forests sustainably. Three simple pathways, summarizing in these ways, but you've heard a lot of details already. And secondly, we need to use more renewable materials. Wouldn't we all want to see more wooden buildings, or the innovative bioplastics, just like textile fibers or other bioproducts, instead of using plastics, concrete and steel? So using more wood could be a cost-effective solution and innovation to contribute to achieve carbon neutrality and to build more resilient economies. And thirdly, smallholders, communities, forest dwellers that live in and around forests, they need to be put at the center of action, at the center of incentives that we can provide to them, so that they can take the maximum benefits out of the forest, because they are really the guardians of forest, and we need to support them. It was already mentioned a few times that reorienting, for example, agricultural subsidies could be a one way forward and could make a big difference. The end of last year, the UN Food System Summit and the COP26 at Glasgow gave very clear signals and commitments from our leaders. And we in FAO will do our share of that work that we could contribute to really making sure that the transformation of agri-food systems and forestry, these three pathways, conserving forests, restoring forests, and using them sustainably, that they go hand in hand, because forest and agriculture really need to work together to make sure that the solutions are charged. So really it's time to scale up now these three pathways, and this is what we are here this week, to finding out these solutions, how we can do that. So thank you from my side, and over to you, Henry, with big thanks already for your fantastic moderation.
Thank you very much indeed, Tina. Thank you very much to Thais, to Margot, to Thomas, Christoph, Sven, Gerardo, and Marco remotely. They put this report together. It's there, it's available for you. Use it as your totem and let so much spring forward from that report. Thank you very much for being with us for the launch of SOFO 2022. Thank you very much to the panel. Please show them your appreciation. Now it's time for you to go forward, have some nourishing, sustainable food, and we'll see you again later on today and during the week. Thank you very much indeed.